What I observe unfolding in Putin's systematic cultivation of strategic partnership with India represents nothing less than the emergence of a comprehensive alternative to Western-led international institutions and alliance structures that could fundamentally reshape global power relationships while demonstrating that sanctions isolation has not achieved intended strategic objectives, but rather accelerated Russian efforts to build parallel international systems with major non-aligned powers. The intelligence assessments I have reviewed regarding Putin's Delhi summit with Prime Minister Modi reveal unprecedented coordination between Russian and Indian leadership on energy cooperation, defense technology sharing, alternative payment mechanisms, and regional security frameworks that operate independently of American alliance structures and economic systems. The intelligence is clear, crystal clear, that Putin's India visit achieved systematic breakthroughs in bilateral cooperation that enable both nations to circumvent Western sanctions while building comprehensive partnership frameworks across energy, defense, technology, and financial sectors that reduce dependence on American and European systems significantly. Congressional intelligence briefings indicate Russian-Indian coordination on oil and gas partnerships that maintain Russian energy export revenues despite sanctions while providing India with discounted energy supplies that strengthen Indian economic competitiveness and energy security without Western dependency. And you know what makes this partnership particularly concerning for American strategic interests is that it demonstrates successful Russian strategy for maintaining great power status through non-Western partnerships that provide economic sustainability and strategic depth. I think what we need to understand about the broader implications of Russian-Indian strategic partnership is that it represents systematic coordination between two major nuclear powers with significant regional influence capabilities to create alternative frameworks for international cooperation that challenge American leadership and Western institutional dominance across multiple domains simultaneously. Intelligence assessments reveal Russian technology transfer to Indian defense systems, space programs, and nuclear energy development that enhances Indian strategic capabilities while providing Russia with advanced Indian technological expertise and manufacturing partnerships that circumvent Western technology restrictions and sanctions limitations. Congressional oversight of intelligence community assessments regarding Russian-Indian military cooperation reveals systematic coordination on advanced weapon systems, intelligence sharing protocols, and regional security frameworks that enable both nations to project power throughout Central Asia, Indian Ocean regions, and broader Indo-Pacific without dependence on American alliance structures or security cooperation. Russian provision of advanced missile systems, nuclear submarines, and fighter aircraft to Indian military forces creates comprehensive defense partnership, while Indian technological capabilities in software development, precision manufacturing, and space technology provide Russian defense industry with alternative supply chains and development partnerships. You know, what troubles me most profoundly about this Russian-Indian energy cooperation is that it enables Putin's regime to maintain energy export revenues that fund continued warfare in Ukraine while providing India with economic advantages that strengthen non-aligned positioning against American pressure for sanctions, compliance, and strategic alignment with Western objectives. Indian purchases of Russian oil at significantly discounted prices create systematic economic benefits for both nations while undermining Western sanctions' effectiveness and demonstrating that major developing economies can maintain strategic autonomy through partnerships with sanctioned powers rather than accepting Western economic and political pressure. The financial architecture implications of Russian-Indian partnership extend beyond immediate trade relationships into systematic development of alternative payment mechanisms, currency cooperation, and financial systems that operate outside Western-controlled SWIFT banking networks and dollar-dominated international finance. Intelligence indicates Russian and Indian coordination on rupee-ruble trade settlements, alternative banking partnerships, and cryptocurrency cooperation that enables comprehensive economic relationship without Western financial system dependency. And I am analyzing assessments that suggest these financial innovations could provide template for broader non-Western economic cooperation that reduces American financial leverage over international trade and monetary policy. But there is also the regional security dimension that reveals systematic Russian-Indian coordination on Central Asian influence, Chinese containment strategies, and broader Indo-Pacific power projection that creates complex triangular relationships between Russia, India, and China that American policy frameworks struggle to address through traditional bilateral alliance approaches. Russian support for Indian regional security objectives in Kashmir, Pakistan relations, and broader South Asian influence enables Indian strategic autonomy, while Russian regional interests in Central Asia benefit from Indian economic cooperation and diplomatic support that strengthens Russian position against Chinese expansion and American containment efforts. What makes this Putin-Modi partnership particularly effective for challenging Western order is the systematic coordination between BRICS institutional development, Shanghai Cooperation Organization expansion, and bilateral cooperation frameworks that create comprehensive alternative architecture for international cooperation across economic, security, and diplomatic domains. I think when we examine intelligence assessments regarding Russian-Indian coordination within BRICS frameworks for currency alternatives, trade settlement mechanisms, and development financing, we are looking at systematic construction of parallel international institutions that provide viable alternatives to Western-dominated World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and other Bretton Woods system institutions. The technology transfer implications include systematic Russian sharing of advanced nuclear technology, space cooperation, and defense systems that enhance Indian strategic capabilities while providing Russian industry with access to Indian technological expertise in information technology, precision manufacturing, and advanced materials that circumvent Western technology restrictions and enable continued Russian defense development despite sanctions. Congressional intelligence oversight reveals Russian-Indian cooperation on satellite technology, nuclear reactor development, and advanced weapons systems that create mutual technological dependencies while reducing both nations' reliance on Western technological cooperation and supply chains. You know, when I analyze the broader implications for American alliance structures in the Indo-Pacific, what becomes clear is that India's strategic partnership with Russia complicates American efforts to build comprehensive containment frameworks against both Russian and Chinese expansion, while Indian non-aligned positioning enables New Delhi to maintain beneficial relationships with Moscow while participating in American-led initiatives like Quad Partnership and Indo-Pacific cooperation when convenient for Indian interests rather than American strategic objectives. The energy geopolitics dimension reveals systematic Russian strategy for maintaining global energy influence through partnerships with major consumer nations that reduce Western leverage over global energy markets while providing Russia with stable revenue streams that enable continued military operations and strategic competition despite sanctions intended to isolate Russian economy. Indian energy partnerships with Russia create long-term commitments that guarantee Russian energy exports while providing India with energy security and price advantages that support Indian economic development and strategic autonomy from Western pressure. Congressional intelligence assessments indicate systematic Chinese concerns about Russian-Indian strategic partnership development because closer Moscow-Delhi cooperation creates potential alternative to Chinese Belt and Road Initiative and reduces Indian dependence on Chinese economic cooperation while strengthening Russian position in Central Asia and broader Eurasian regions where Chinese and Russian interests increasingly compete. This triangular dynamic creates opportunities for American diplomatic engagement with India to prevent complete Russian-Indian alignment while managing Chinese expansion through regional partnerships that benefit American strategic objectives. The nuclear cooperation implications extend beyond civilian nuclear energy development into potential coordination on nuclear weapons technology, delivery systems, and strategic doctrine that could enhance both Russian and Indian nuclear capabilities while reducing transparency and international oversight of nuclear weapons development and deployment that American non-proliferation objectives require for maintaining global nuclear security frameworks. But there is also systematic opportunity for American diplomatic engagement that addresses legitimate Indian strategic interests while preventing complete Russian-Indian alignment through economic cooperation, technology sharing, and security partnerships that provide India with alternatives to Russian dependency without requiring Indian abandonment of strategic autonomy or non-aligned positioning that Indian leadership considers essential for national sovereignty and regional influence. I am analyzing intelligence community assessments that detail potential American responses to Russian-Indian partnership through enhanced cooperation with other Indo-Pacific allies, economic incentives for Indian strategic autonomy, and technology-sharing partnerships that provide India with advanced capabilities while maintaining alignment with American strategic objectives and democratic governance principles, rather than authoritarian partnership models that Russian cooperation represents. The precedent implications of successful Russian-Indian strategic partnership extend beyond bilateral cooperation into systematic demonstration that major non-aligned powers can maintain strategic autonomy and economic development through partnerships with sanctioned authoritarian powers while resisting Western pressure for alignment and sanctions compliance. Successful Russian-Indian cooperation encourages other major developing economies, including Brazil, South Africa, and Southeast Asian nations, to pursue similar partnerships with Russia, China, and other authoritarian powers as alternatives to Western dependency and alliance requirements. Regional alliance coordination for addressing Russian-Indian partnership faces systematic challenges because different American allies have varying relationships with India and different assessments of Russian threat levels that prevent comprehensive coordinated response to Russian-Indian cooperation, while Indian strategic importance for Indo-Pacific cooperation requires careful management of alliance concerns about Indian partnerships with sanctioned Russian regime. Recovery scenarios for preventing complete Russian-Indian strategic alignment require comprehensive American diplomatic engagement that addresses legitimate Indian interests in energy security, defense cooperation, and strategic autonomy, while providing viable alternatives to Russian partnerships through enhanced economic cooperation, technology transfer, and security partnerships that enable Indian strategic objectives without dependence on authoritarian cooperation and sanctions circumvention that undermines Western institutional frameworks and democratic governance principles. As I conclude this analysis, I recognize that Putin's India visit and resulting strategic partnership represent more than bilateral cooperation or sanctions evasion, but rather systematic construction of alternative international order that challenges Western institutional dominance while demonstrating that major non-aligned powers can maintain strategic autonomy and economic development through partnerships that operate outside Western-controlled systems and alliance structures. The decisions made about American engagement with India, alliance coordination for managing Russian partnerships, and institutional reforms that address legitimate concerns of non-aligned powers will determine whether Western-led international order maintains global influence and effectiveness, or whether alternative systems centered on Russian-Chinese-Indian cooperation become viable alternatives that reduce American leadership and democratic institutional influence over global governance and economic development.